Since you had all of this here, and didn't come. And over here, you can stop and not. Yes. Wasn't what I was thinking, but that's gonna be one of those places. answers were, yeah, that's a logical thing. We learned fairly just a little bit about coal. I mean, coal for it. Everything is to come and see me with what to do for me to look at it. And then you can make corrections, which I'm certainly happy to do. That's the thing to do. Okay? All right. Don't lecture them. Okay? Because they have to listen to me the whole time. And they're tired.
Sounds exhausting.
Yeah, but you can talk about parts of speech if you want. They need it.
My favorite.
The things we will do, check in on past cars, and then our most fun name, Benny, like hear about it's a real word. You'll learn all about it today. The focus of chapter 6. And then for the asynchronous online part, we'll look at we will focus on bullets today. So checking in, your task for the week. Hooray, hooray, there's no quiz, there's no journal entry for this week. Wait for it, there are a few things you do. But there's a short video lecture, that's the one that's going to be on this silent way. It takes 10 minutes to watch. There's then 2 video answers. There's 2 video answers that are demonstration videos of the silent way. And I will just say, you should watch the video lecture first and then do the video and the demonstration video. But while you're watching the lecture on the silent way, you're gonna think to yourself, like, I just don't get it. What? How is this supposed to work? Wait until you watch the demonstration videos, because I really think the silent way is just one that you have to watch to see it. It's real weird. It just is.
Is it the same video from?
I think we did watch some of the same ones. There's a few that I think are pretty video, so I'm not sure if it's the right one. But it's just hard to explain. It's better understood just seeing it done. And so just keep that in mind if you're watching the video lecture and you're like, I don't understand what she means. Just that you'll see in the demonstration video. So there are original posts are just like usual. Original posts are due Saturday, and then your replies to colleagues annotation are due. But most importantly, your midterm exam is out there. So it's been available to you now for a week, and it's due next Monday night. So there are, hopefully you've all had a look at it at least thus far. There are 5 essay questions. When I say essay questions, that really means like you'll respond by writing, right? So I don't want you to think I have to write 5 essays. You do not. For many of the questions, 1 paragraph will be enough. Others of them, you'll want to write more like 2 or 3 paragraphs. And the kind of clue, if you're wondering, like, well, is this a question where maybe I should write 1 paragraph, or is this a question where I should write, say, 3 paragraphs? It says on the exam right next to each of those 5 questions how many points each of them is worth. So if you notice that one of them says 12 points and another says 6 points, maybe use that as a guide that probably I want to write more for the one that's saying it would be worth 12 points. You probably could write less for the one that's worth 6 points, and so on. Does that make sense in terms of how you might calibrate how much am I expected to write about these things? And it's not that I just want you to write. That's about how long, how much writing I think it would take to adequately answer all of the questions, right? So read the questions thoroughly, because some, it says 5 questions, but some of them ask kind of a few questions within the question. So make sure you're addressing everything that's written on that page. Okay. That said, has any of you looked at it and come to class with questions? Yeah, Valentina. You can't find it. Okay, that's a very important problem. Let's point it out.
On.
Okay, now. So if you go under, here I am under the content tab. And we are in, there's a couple places where you should be able to find it, but one And then I think, so if I go back, I went into the module for week 8, and I scrolled to the bottom where it says TESL 341 midterm exam. And if I just tap on that, it gives me the PDF.
Yeah, got it.
Then there's another way, week 9, which is what we're in right now. Where again, if I see midterm exam, that's like the assignments drop box, but also if you click on it, and right here, that's where you can also open that PDF. And it'll pop up on. There's a couple of places where you should be able to find it, both under week 8 and
No, not a lot of people do that. You think the assignment is just like, like the first time I see it.
oh yeah, I'm still learning a lot of things in D2L. It's one of those systems where there's probably a lot more capacity than most faculty know how. Is everyone good on just where to find it? Yeah. Okay. I'm very glad you asked that. That is sensible. Yeah, totally. What other questions might you have? You can utilize it's obviously an open book, open resource exam, right? And no one's there to say like, don't let's in the book. You know, the whole point is that you're utilizing all the resources that you have available, all the PowerPoint slides, any video lectures or video ants that we've used up until this point. Obviously, your textbooks should be your main source of information. You can look things up online with always the caveat, the warning that some things on the internet are garbage, right? So you gotta be careful and check that against what you know you've already learned in this class. The resources you cannot use are each other, other people, living or dead people, except myself. Right? So if you do have a question and you feel like I'm just lost here, you can send me that question. I won't give you answers to what I want you to write on the exam, but I might point you in the right direction, or I might clarify what I meant by a question if that's unclear to you. So you could talk to me in class today, you can come to me for office hours on Thursday, send me an email today, we need another time, or you can send me an email just with your question. Okay? Please don't stress. But also, please don't leave this until Monday night. You will find yourself very stressed in that equation, right?
Too late, I'm already starting.
Well, no, because today's Tuesday. That means you have all today. Then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. No. So if you just break it down, start working on these. Maybe you do one a day until you get there, right? That would be a good way to break it down. You should make sure to cite your sources. What does that mean? What do I mean if I say, please cite your sources?
Chapter and book.
Okay, so maybe where in the textbook you found it. What else might I mean? Yeah, give credit to whoever wrote it. So if you're mentioning something to do with the total physical response method, well, I happen to know you didn't make up total physical response, right? You learned about it in this class. You probably learned about it in the Larson, Freeman, and Anderson text. You probably watched a video on it, and that exists on the internet. Probably discussed it in class, and maybe there was something on a PowerPoint slide that you want to pull from. All of those are sources, right? So if you want to include that information, cite it in your exam, in the paper that you're writing. Usually that's a parentheses that gives an author, a year, something, a page number.
Just a basic set, not MLA or anything like that.
Yeah, I really don't care what format you're using. So if it's MLA or APA or any of them, just an in-text citation that shows me you recognize this came from a source and you're telling me what that source is, right? And if it's not perfectly formatted, that's not my issue. Like I'm not, like you're saying, like I'm not there to make sure that you put the comma in the right place. I'm more concerned that you're recognizing this came from this book. on this page, that's where I found it. And there's even a link within the exam to Purdue's online writing lab that gives you a lot of help if you're still confused on like, how do I cite a source? That information is found there. Any questions about citing your sources for the exam or just? Okay. Well, please, like I said, don't leave it to the last minute and don't be afraid to reach out if you're too big of a question. And also don't feel afraid, like if it's Monday and you're like, well, I can't send her my question now, then she'll know I didn't get it. Just send me my question. I will still answer you. I will not be angry with you. Like, it'll be okay. Just send me your question, okay? Alrighty, well then, this week, like I mentioned, we're working with two methods that are quite strange. I mean, admittedly, they are strange, probably different from something you've seen or experienced in a language learning classroom. The first one, the one that we'll deal with today, is desuggestionpedia, sometimes also called suggestipedia, which is kind of weird, but you'll see in a moment. But the method is just about as strange as its name, and still keep an open mind. In this class, we're doing our best to play the believers game rather than the doubters game, and saying we're starting from a position of saying, okay, this may be unexpected, but there may be something useful for me in this method that I'll be able to sort of take the kernel into my own classroom in the future. So a little bit of background on Desuggestionpedia. It was created by a Bulgarian psychoanalyst named Georgi Lazarov. Here he is in all of his glory. Doesn't that look like a face you would trust? Lazarov was convinced that we as human beings only use about 5 to 10% of our mental capacity. That there was a lot of brain capacity that was going unused because we are inefficient learners due to the fact that we have put up a lot of psychological barriers to learning out of primarily a fear of failure was his position. He felt that our self-imposed limits that were keeping us from using that 90 to 95% of our brain needed to be desuggested. Desuggested. That's where we get the name Desuggestionpedia. The idea is that we have all of this experience in our lives that have told us or suggested to us that we will fail, that things will not go well for us, that we will not be able to effectively learn. And so we go into learning situations with all of these psychological barriers. But if we could desuggest or just suggest, that's why it's also sometimes called just Desuggestionpedia. But if we could suggest or otherwise sort of convince our brain to think differently about how successful we will be at language learning, then we could unlock this 90 to 95% of our brain capacity and become more efficient learners. So it was very focused on the affective domain. Affective domain. Again, the affective domain has to do with what? Stress, yes, anxiety, self-esteem, all of those things, and more broadly, just emotions. Emotions that we experience as learners, as human beings who also learn, right? So suggestology was thought to be the science concerned with the systematic study of non-rational and or non-conscious influences. So the idea was that we should create a learning environment where we're not thinking about learning, where learning becomes subconscious or unconscious. It just is happening because of the learning environment that we're in. We're not especially responsive. As a result, in Desuggestionpedia, there was a lot of focus on the physical environment of the classroom. So a lot of arts, like visual arts on the walls, a lot of music being heard sort of all the time, usually classical music. Posters that might have sort of information about the target language, but that you wouldn't be reading or focusing on. They would just sort of be in the ambient environment around you. And you would sort of subconsciously take in this information, but you're not especially studying or looking at these posters with language information. So there was a lot of attention paid to the decor in the room, very comfortable furniture, the arrangement of the space to make it just a very warm and inviting kind of experience. So nothing like this room that we're in right now that is clearly arranged with desks and chairs and notes, and we're looking at a board together. Nothing like that. It would be very much a sort of living room, almost like it. I was going to say a therapy office. Right. Sort of. It's suggesting that this is a sort of comfortable space where you can feel safe and just let down some of those inhibitions. Yeah. Some of the claims of suggestology, or later called suggestology. Again, I don't understand really why. Sometimes if we were suggesting that you would be very successful, or de-suggesting all negative, I get it. But either way, it claims that by using these kinds of methods, we can learn much more efficiently. Like these big claims that your memorization would be accelerated by 25 times, that you would become 25 times more efficient in, say, acquiring vocabulary than you would if you were using other methods. It's not only applicable to language learning, but to all kinds of learning. And music and musical rhythm were really central to the approach. Not only because music can tend to put learners at ease, but tying the language, the target language that students are acquiring, to sort of the rhythm and cadence of the music that they're doing. These are some of the claims. More of these sort of theoretical components of the suggestive media. One is this sort of idea of infantilization, where the student is sort of like an infant and the teacher is sort of like a parent. And we have this very sort of trusting dynamic of being sort of cared for by this caregiving authority figure. And that sort of dynamic was reinforced with having a lot of sort of childish games and fun activities, so that the students could relax, not experience kind of negative stress, and again, just sort of trust the care of their caregiver or teacher. Another important theoretical idea behind suggestive media is an idea of double planedness, or the idea that you're sort of learning on two different planes, two different sort of fields of existence. There is the conscious plane, the plane where they're paying attention and there is, to a certain extent, direct instruction or the directed activities in the classroom. That's one plane on which students are operating or existing. But then on another plane, the subconscious, or below our level of conscious awareness, is where we're experiencing a lot of music. Again, the posters around the room with information on the target language, and all of these sort of intentional parts of the environment that are supposed to put one in a frame of mind of very positive thinking and openness to their success in learning the target language. It was very much built on dialogue, and so dialogues are read using particular intonation and rhythm of music that are sort of synced together. there's always sort of classical music playing in the background, but like I said, the dialogue was also synced to like the rhythm and intonation of the music. And the idea is that at least during some of the first readings of the dialogue, it's sort of like a concert that students are simply listening to. So they're not expected to do anything, but just to sort of enjoy listening to the music and the dialogue, somewhat passive. Another important idea behind the Suggested was the idea of authority of the teacher. And this might seem unexpected given the high affective focus. Other methods that we'll look at that have a lot of high focus on affective consideration will really sort of decentralize the teacher in a more student-centered kind of approach. But the thinking with Desuggested was, even with this high affective focus, the belief was that learners will learn best if they have sort of complete confidence in the teacher as the authoritative source of their language learning. So if the teacher is very much the sort of director and authoritative guide in this language learning experience, that the learners will feel more sort of at ease, just again with almost that infantilization idea, but that like we're just here children ready to trust our parents in this very relaxed language learning experience. So as a result, the teacher must first show absolute confidence in the method. So with Desuggested, it's an approach that or a method that goes sort of very by the book. It's highly suggested that it's sort of done in its pure form. So not kind of like I mentioned at the beginning, taking the kernel and a couple pieces that you like and integrating that into this more sort of eclectic approach. No, they would say, no, we're doing Desuggested. It goes like this, right? And following the method sort of by the book. And we'll look at that process in a moment because it's very prescribed. But also teachers should be fastidious in their manner, their conduct, their dress. They should take this sort of their teaching very seriously as a profession and sort of showing up very buttoned up. The teacher should organize and strictly adhere to the process or method. I'll walk us through that process and method in just a moment. Have a solemn attitude in class, maintain modest enthusiasm, so not a lot of silliness, not a lot of high energy. Go ahead.
So this is this guy,
Lots of.
yeah, he's from Bulgaria. Do you think, I don't know much about that culture, but do you think that has anything to do with the fact that that's not what he's doing?
What do you think?
I think so.
I mean, probably, yeah. I
Maybe, I don't know, I'm thinking back in my day, when I was going to grade school, I went to a Catholic school. I mean, that's how they were. That was, how long ago, and they, when, nuns were teachers. The attitude was very formal, very upright.
Yeah.
Something that's fine.
I don't know much about him beyond sort of what I've shared with you, but it's my sense that any thinker is a culturally situated thinker, right? So
Right.
they're always going to be informed by their own cultural background and their experience, and so one can assume that he was also heavily shaped by his European life of the early 20th century. Yeah, go ahead.
Good thing. I want to make a good teacher under this guideline. And the second one, what's festivities?
Festivities usually just mean very sort of neat, put together, not wearing their hoodie and their
Yep.
like this, right? So like I would not qualify today either. Like these, no. Probably a little more like with this woman, how this woman is dressed, with a blazer, very,
Very boring.
kind of boring, right? But to be trusted, to set us at ease, like the clear, authority professional that she is. In addition to those sort of theoretical components I just mentioned, there are some other principles of the suggested media that are probably important for us. The goal of the suggested media really was everyday communication. So not a lot of translating documents, not a huge emphasis on reading and writing, more so on listening and speaking, but so that people could come to use this language for everyday communication in that target language. With a lot of emphasis on vocabulary, a lot of vocabulary acquisition, and again, communicative use, actually being able to get our students to a place where they can use this language to say things they want to say and understand what's said to them. Thinking about those affective characteristics, those emotional pieces to language learning, students would take on a new identity in the suggested media classroom. So they didn't just show up as themselves, but would be assigned a sort of character in the dialogue. And they would be almost like as in role, like a very extended role play, operating within that assumed learner identity. There was, again, a lot of relaxation, minimizing anxiety, a lot of the art and music toward that end. Long dialogues were sort of the backbone of the whole sort of lesson structure. The idea being that they would create a sort of safe structure that students would not have to sort of come prepared each time a new dialogue was introduced, that was the sort of story that they were all entering in together. And then there was a clear demarcation of a receptive phase and an active phase. And by that I mean they would start out just doing a lot of listening. And in that way, it's similar to total physical response or some of the others looked at where they could just do a lot of listening initially without any feeling or expectation like they had to speak. That being the receptive phase. And then later, there was a more active phase where they did play, their role in the dialogue, and then begin to sort of manipulate or play with different aspects of the dialogue as well. Again, the idea that the teacher is the authority and is very much directing classroom activity, but that all the interaction is very kind, errors are corrected very gently. So even though the teacher is the authority, the way they sort of hold their authority in the classroom was with a lot of sort of care and not wanting to intimidate or make students experience any negative emotion. Again, that's the whole idea here, is that we just create this very relaxed atmosphere where no one's afraid of it. Interestingly, the L1, the first language that students use quite a bit. It's used to give instructions, to translate a lot of the vocabulary that's being taught, to give L1 equivalents, to explain grammar rules as well. So it was not, there was no concern about sort of L1 getting in the way. L1 was used as a tool to help students understand what we're doing, to have that, for especially the translations of some of the vocabulary, to have that bridge from the known to the unknown, to utilize the tool of their first language to understand some things about, say, the grammar of the student. And assessment in a desuggestive media setting would just be observing the in-class performance of the dialogue. If students are able to participate in the dialogue and understand it, then that's the assessment. That's how we can see whether or not they are acquiring the and the culture of that target language was very highly valued through the art and the music, and all of those sort of things in the learning environment, art, music, etc. Being able to sort of reach the subconscious of the student, suggest to them their success in that target. The design of the course is very particular. This is kind of what I mean when I say like it's done in this way, and it deviations or changes from the format are discouraged. So a course would last 30 days, where students would be in the learning environment 4 hours a day, 6 days a week, right? So you really, this would have to be the thing you're doing, right? It's not just a sort of, I can stop in from time to time and do my Spanish lesson. No, this is a central focus of what you would be doing for that amount of time. And like I mentioned before, it's very dialogue based. So within those 30 days, there would be 10 units. So if you do the math on every 3 days, basically, you would be working with a new dialogue. So for about 3 days, one dialogue is the focus. In each dialogue, they would have about 1,200 words they would be working with. Many of those would be the L1 translation of those different 1,200 words would be provided sort of in the margins of the dialogue if students are given the script. Grammatical rules would be offered in the first language, and they would be explicit. They would be explained very directly, but it would also be fairly minimal. So grammar was not a huge focus in the Suggestopedia, but what they explained, they would consider sort of the essential pieces, maybe things like tense. And they would explain those things explicitly in the first language. But again, not a huge focus, not explaining sort of exhaustively all the grammar. So we have this 30-day sort of course. On day 1 of each of the units, again, the teacher would be clearly in charge, sort of directing the space. The teacher on that first day would stress ease and enjoyment of language learning, that we're here to just have this really lovely experience together. And on that first day, the students would develop these new identities and occupations. So you will typically be assigned to them by their teacher. You are this person in the dialogue, and here's an explanation of your background and your role in the society and this sort of narrative that we'll put together. And again, I think we've talked about this a little bit before, but the idea of having the different sort of target language go or a different learner identity, why might that be useful? Or why not might that be specifically part of this suggested media?
Remove some of that anxiety and some of that reinvent, like the example we used before. It's Karen taking the class, not me.
Right. This idea that if it's some other character who's not Annie, just playing this role in this dialogue, then Annie doesn't have a lot at stake, right? Because it's Karen. She's doing this other thing. And she's, the postal worker who showed up late or whatever, whatever it is in the dialogue, but it doesn't have anything to do with Annie. It's just Karen over there. So the idea being that if you can sort of separate yourself from this character that you're playing in the dialogue, you can take risks and be even sort of more playful than you might otherwise if you're showing up as your authentic self or your true identity. So each time there's a new dialogue, a new unit, a new identity is sort of signed. There's a lot of songs that first day to loosen up your tongue and your jaw and all of your verbal apparatus to kind of get you comfortable moving. Still on that same first day, there's lengthy dialogue that the students will hear first. There's a very positive message in the title, where it's introduced as sort of an adventure that we're on. There's a lot of the sometimes the whole dialogue or sometimes just key vocabulary will be presented in translation side by side. So you'll see, you know, the dialogue in the first language as well as the dialogue in the target language. There may be some first language comments about different grammar or vocabulary that's featured in the dialogue. And then there's artwork that's interspersed throughout the dialogues to sort of maintain a very relaxing environment, all very calming and reassuring. The teacher reads the dialogue in what is known as the first concert. So they're all just listening, very relaxed in some nice, comfortable chairs. And the intonation and the rhythm of the dialogue are matched to this classical music that's playing. And students can take notes if they want to. There may also be time after for some short choral readings where some of the students are involved in reading some parts together. And then it's read a second time, this time at maybe a more normal pace or rhythm, but with the music still playing, but not necessarily matching the rhythm of the dialogue to the music, but just at a more natural piece of rhythm. And the students just listen that second time. Then, so that's just day one of class. Then the students have this sort of homework that they go home and are expected simply to read that same dialogue that they did in class that day 2 times. Once just before falling asleep, and the next time just upon waking in the morning. Why would that be? Why that particular time? Just before falling asleep and just upon waking up. Valentina?
That would be the last thing staying.
Okay, Angel, what were you gonna say? Or what would you like?
The idea that like when you're like sleeping, you're practicing like your brain like practices new skills like consciously, you like reading stuff like sleep, but instead of being mind like consciously.
Yes.
And you wake up like you read it again.
So both of you are basically getting at this idea that, again, if you remember from some of those first slides, a lot of the idea of desuggested-media was that we're operating on these 2 planes. So both what we're sort of explicitly paying attention to in the classroom, but then a lot that's happening on this subconscious plane, where we're not specifically paying attention to it. And the thought was that just before falling asleep and just upon waking up in the morning is probably the closest we can intentionally get to being subconscious, to being not working with our conscious brain, right? We're either entering into sleep or just coming out of sleep. So trying to take advantage of these almost liminal or in-between spaces where we can kind of tap into the subconscious, what's the hope or the idea. So that's the homework. You read it twice, once immediately before sleep and once immediately upon sleep. Then days 2 and 3, there's a lot of practice with that same dialogue. So students read the dialogue, they're given these hats that are supposed to sort of be part of their particular character or role within the dialogue. And the hats also sort of lend themselves to a lot of playfulness. We're being a little bit silly, wearing these kind of costume pieces. There's a lot of games, maybe involving, if it's a new kind of script, working with the alphabet of that language. They're also encouraged to use these sort of different emotions for the intonation of the reading. So maybe first we read it like we're being very silly, and then we read it like we're very angry, and then and so on, just choosing different emotions, but reading that same dialogue in a variety of different with the sort of different intonations that are supposed to match different emotions. Again, with the idea of just sort of playing with that dialogue over and over again. Doing it as a dramatic audition, so sort of overacting, even if it's, even if they're trying to match the emotion with what's conveyed in the dialogue, being inquisitive when there's a question, just a little bit over the top, to draw out some of the kinds of intonation patterns that would match the different parts of the dialogue. Those things are part of day 2, a lot of playing around with the same dialogue. On the 3rd day, we're still working with that same dialogue, but maybe some sort of creative activities, maybe changing pieces of the dialogue around a little bit. Sometimes they'll introduce different competitive games, different ways of role playing the dialogue. But again, the idea is that we're working with that same structure, that same lengthy dialogue that we started on the 1st day, but we're able to sort of manipulate it a little bit in a very playful way. And like I mentioned, each unit takes 3 days, and then on day 4, you would start a new unit with the new dialogue, and that whole process begins again with the first concert and the second concert, and so on. We'll watch 2 demonstration videos, but before we do that, what questions do you have about the method?
Feels like English teaching for theater students.
Okay. So it's a little like drama club.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was reading this through, I'm gonna go. And, he called it language barking.
Okay. Like action role play, right? It is probably a lot like that. Yeah, if the in a setting where like I don't LARP and I haven't tried it, but my understanding is like maybe there's somebody who's kind of in charge, or is that different kinds of things?
It's again, you can have
That's
somebody
like,
who like,
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm
yeah,
thinking of, right?
You can do that too. Sometimes there are people that want to develop like the storyline. Some people will like historic battles, right? And some people will write like scenes that are going to be in a play, and they'll go to a place and act them out. So it kind of felt like this when we were reading it.
And I think the parallels are, that make a lot of sense, and even like the kind of theoretical idea behind it, because I think probably what's attractive about LARPing for a lot of people is just getting out of your normal sort of day-to-day existence and entering this other space where everybody's like, everybody bought in. Yeah. Right? Like everybody said, like, we're gonna go and we're gonna be in this historical battle and we're gonna be serious as heck about it, right? And so there's a certain safety in that, because if you just as an individual went and started doing all that and no one else was on board and we're not in, then that's a very threatening situation, right? That's a big risk that you're taking on. But if everybody's agreed, and this is the thing that we showed up to do, it's a little like this idea that it's just this fun, warm, risk-free, inhibitions-low environment to enjoy doing this thing where we're all play acting at this story that we can just sort of enter into. I would also certainly appreciate or understand if some of you were quite skeptical going into sort of thinking about this. Tell me some of your other thoughts.
I mean, could be effective, could be ineffective. It depends on the kind of student. It depends on that classroom. Like I could say we're going for this style of teaching, but it was a different style of teaching. I wouldn't see it work. But even then, in the classroom, you do still have those scenarios where we're the salesman, someone's the person buying stuff, or we're like, oh yeah, we're in the store, and, oh, how many eggs and stuff like that. Like we still role play to a point,
sure,
where it does help, but like 30 days straight out, not for me.
Well, and you really enmeshed in the whole experience, after a few units.
Yeah.
Angel, what were you gonna say?
I know, like, it's like mental, like it's like stress and stuff, but I feel like increase some people like stress. Like,
Right, right. So it would have to be really intentionally designed and executed in such a way that everybody would really buy in at the beginning and then feel really comfortable before you get to the like different voices and stuff like that. Because you're right, if there was still people experiencing a lot of uncertainty or inhibition around it, the whole thing would really fall apart at that, right?
Then it contradicts that whole effective filter. It's like, well, I'm uncomfortable with this idea. I'm not gonna buy in. That silly hat, I'm not.
Right, yeah, yeah. And if the hats come in, that affective filter goes up, I'm out, right? Jason, are you gonna say So this might be a method that really caters to some intelligences and not others, right? So it might be very effective for some and others might feel actually really alienated and kind of that.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Other ideas or questions or reactions before we go on? So, I'm curious, Disha. Okay, okay. Withholding judgment, not real sure. Okay, let's watch these and see. Because I think sometimes it's helpful to kind of just see it play out a little bit more so than it's like.
It's gonna look like what you see preschoolers do when they're playing. Kind of, they're learning through play.
Yeah, there is something to that. This again, this idea of infantilization where you're just like, we're all just here. There's no expectation. It's just fun and enjoyable. Oh, it's Slurpee. Yeah, there we go.
I'm thinking is that people learn when they feel that they're succeeding, because nothing succeeds as well as success. The suggestive system, devised by Georgi Rozanov, doctor and psychotherapist in Bulgaria, tries to take into consideration all of the factors that make for easier learning and systematize it. My understanding of Suggestipedia is that there are 4 fundamental principles. The first is that everything must be positive, including mistakes. When students make mistakes, they're actually learning something new. Second principle is to send the same information to long-term and short-term memory simultaneously. And the whole theory of Suggestipedia is based on giving information of strong intensity and weak intensity at the same time. And in that way, students don't forget after 4 days. Third principle is that people seem to remember much more when emotional meaning is given to all information. The fourth principle is before people analyze, they assimilate. Once people have assimilated things, they have greater pleasure and greater facility in analyzing. These then are the fundamental principles of Suggestipedia. What it looks like in practice is the students have a text which has been specially written, most often by the teachers themselves. The reason we use specially written texts is to get rid of any negative suggestions and to focus on positive situations where the students can feel safe, open up, take chances, and know that they're at no time in danger. There are 14 characters, and the students, each one of them, will play one of the roles of the 14 characters. Each lesson begins with a prelude where the teacher pre-teaches everything that's supposed to be learned, followed by a concert reading where the teacher reads the text to a background of classical music. Following this reading, we have the decoding session where the teacher gives a lot of memory hooks so that the students remember almost everything through a series of little anecdotes and fairy tale stories. Following this, we have a series of quick moving activities, including games that could be ball games and card games, jokes, little sketches, little competitions, all kinds of things, riddles, movement games, which reinforce the things that we've seen in our texts. Following this, we have a relaxation concert using Baroque, late Baroque music, in fact, written mostly between 1700 and 1750, that brings about a state of relaxation. And this is particularly useful for taking vast amounts of information in. And so the teacher, in a sense, is a perceptual engineer and an architect of an environment where students are learning through their own learning strategies. Those who are predominantly visual are going to get enough visual stimulus to be able to learn what they're learning. Those who are predominantly auditive or auditory are going to learn through their ears, and they'll have enough to actually learn from that standpoint. And those who are kinesthetic will have plenty of leeway to move about as much as it's necessary for them to move about to be able to learn. Shall we now have a quick look at the room? It certainly doesn't look like a regular classroom. The importance of aesthetics in a suggestopedic classroom cannot be overestimated. Recent research has shown that in any communicative situation, only 7% of the overall impression is conveyed by what is actually said. That 38% comes from the body language, facial expression, and other nonverbal cues, and 55% is the context. Since Suggestopedia is a creation of an environment where students are to discover their potential, to develop and become, the room must be the reflection of and theater for their highest aspirations. And now, why don't we look at an example of a real Suggestopedic English class, which I will comment on for you. Well, good morning, everybody. Okay, nice to see you here in Vancouver. Vancouver is one of the most fantastic cities in Canada, and I'm so glad that you could all make it here. I noticed that Cindy Mills over here has come all the way from Ireland. Cindy is a civil servant. She works for the government. She's a civil servant, and she comes from Limerick. Limerick is right in the middle of Ireland. And of course, she's Irish. And next to Cindy, from the very instant the students come into the classroom, they take on a new identity. The purpose of this identity is to bring about a break with any unpleasant memories that they might have about their past learning experiences. And in fact, throughout the entire duration of the course, the students will know each other by these new suggestopedic identities. Each one of these identities contains a particularity of the language. If you listen for a moment or two, you'll hear that the name, first name, and the town, as well as the profession of almost all of the identities, correspond to one vowel or consonant sound. This man over here is rather unusual, and his job is even more unusual than he is. This man is Gray Way, and Gray comes from Ames, Iowa, USA. He's American. He's a spaceman. He spends more time flying around the world, but literally flying around the world, than actually at home in Ames. So it's nice to see you here. Was your last trip to the moon an interesting one? Yes. Some Russians over there. The Russians on the moon. The gentleman next to Gray Way is Thornton Thunder. And Thornton Thunder is a Scotsman from the extreme north of Scotland. He's from Thurso. And he's got a rather unusual profession, even more unusual than Gray Way. He's a soothsayer. A soothsayer It's an old English word for somebody who predicts the future, who can tell you what's going to happen tomorrow, next week, next year, etc. And it's a very, very useful thing to be. And Thornton is a very, very useful friend to have. We have Thornton, we have Gray, we have Sue. After all of the identities have been distributed, there's a kind of recapping so that the students realize that these will be the identities that they are going to have. The distribution of the texts is a particularly important and ceremonious event. It's as though the teacher is giving a personal present to each one of the students. Envy, the future, or what it will know about the past. Wednesday, while this first concert reading might appear a little bit exaggerated, both in intonation and in nature, it must be remembered that the students are not paying attention to the teacher at this moment. They're discovering the text. They're seeing the written words. They are using their highlighters in order to pick out any words that are particularly interesting to them. And the teacher's voice is only coming to them through peripheral perception. The entire ceremony of the first concert reading, through which we present all new material, has been designed to support the words that they're reading. I am Thornton Thunder. I am from Thurso. At the farthest point north in Scotland, I'm a jack of all trades and master of many. During our 4 weeks together, we will be learning more about the human mind and the marvelous things it is capable of. We will become familiar with the intellectual, emotional, and technological resources at our disposal. While the decoding session is somewhat traditional in format, in that it's the teacher giving information to the students, it's during this phase of the suggestive cycle that students come into contact with some of the fundamental cultural tenets of the new language and develop a respect and, above all, an enjoyment of the form of humor that characterizes that civilization. Thunder. Usually we say I'm a jack of all trades, a master of, absolutely Thornton, but Thornton, who of course knows this expression, is a master of many. Every now and then, the explanations are a little bit far-fetched, even if not totally historically inaccurate. Students don't seem to mind this. They seem to know, in fact, when the teacher is joking and when real information is being conveyed. Okay, if you're happy, you cheer, hooray! And if you're not happy, you go, can you boo? Do you want to try booing? I think you probably seem to boo a little better than you actually cheer. Then you've had more practice of booing than cheering. Okay. The acquisition of this new way of seeing things, a new form of humor, is precisely what makes it possible for the student to develop new aspects of his personality through the knowledge he's assimilating. This is one of the strongest motivational factors in a learning experience. Perhaps one of the most horrible things is listening to Bach when Bach is played as if he were Debussy. Can you imagine that? There's a terrible joke. I just can't. It's not in very good taste, but jokes are very important in the suggestive classroom, not only because they give linguistic information, but because jokes usually involve a surprise. And in actual fact, from a neurophysiological point of view, a joke is the short-circuiting of the left and right hemispheres, because the beginning of a joke always starts off straightforwardly enough with something which is perfectly logical in one context, and then all of a sudden we find ourselves in another context. The left hemisphere is the rational, predictable, mathematical part of our personalities, and the right hemisphere is the spatio-temporal aspect of our lives. And it's this which is shifted and makes people laugh. Okay. Yes. It's a story about a snobbish lady, a very, very snobbish lady, who went up to see the French conductor Pierre Boulez and said, Mr. Boulez, how are you? And he didn't know her. He said, fine, thank you, madam. And how is good Mrs. Boulez? She's very well, thank you, madam. And the woman was very snobbish, but a little ignorant. And she said, and how is dear Mr. Bach? Is he still composing? And they said, no, madam, he's still decomposing. It's not very good taste. I just couldn't resist telling you. I'm sorry, I promise not to tell you any more jokes like that. And sometimes from the South, I'm American. Okay, I'm American, good. Okay, that's fantastic. Okay, and I'm English. Okay, I'm Irish. Okay, we put all the words together in English. I'm Irish. Everybody? I'm Irish. Good. Okay, any other national? One of the most effective means of working on pronunciation particularities is by introducing a situation which is just so outrageous that nobody can possibly feel any guilt about having made a mistake. Ames. Absolutely, Ames. Because we have two sounds in English. And the difference is no vocal cords, and is with the vocal cords. Okay, and if you want to have more fun than you might have had since the age of 18 months, I've got a terrific game for you. It's makes you sound a little bit like a boat, but it's great fun, and people know you're coming 5 minutes before you arrive, okay? All right? In this particular case, the problem is that in Dutch, there doesn't seem to be a z sound, but just like books. Books. Okay, but with bag, a g is just a k with the vocal cords. It's bags. Everybody? Bags. Okay, fantastic. And I have a little story for you. Do you know the story about the mummy mosquito and the baby mosquito? You don't know the story about the mummy mosquito and the baby mosquito? Really? Okay, I'm going to tell you the story about the mummy mosquito and the baby mosquito. Okay, but can you go? Zzz? Okay, here, let me over here. Okay. Okay, fine. And it's a story about a mummy mosquito. And one day, mummy mosquito says to the baby mosquito, you're a big boy now. Another positive spin-off of telling jokes is that people are delighted when they actually understand them. and are quite anxious to pass them on to friends, family, or other associates. Many students begin making jokes of their own, thereby becoming creative in the language they're in the process of learning. I think this is the most exciting day of my life.
Okay. It goes on, more steps, but that gives you an idea of the setup and the kinds of.
Did you watch the
I don't know what the arrangement was.
One way to find out.
Would that work with the?
What do you think?
It seems like they wanted to blend both.
It would probably have to be pretty significant modified, right? Shorter activities, shorter dialogue, less expectation of just sitting back and relaxingly listening to classical music, right? They'd have to probably do something that involves more movement, more the kinds of jokes and activities that would be, modified and appropriate for that age level. But I think the idea of playing different roles in a dialogue and listening, it's kind of like storytelling, really, right? And so if the storyteller is engaging enough, I think that can be, littler kids can really enter into that. But again, the expectations around length of time, moving their bodies, modifying some of his jokes, I can barely understand, let alone but children, so significant modifications.
And then, in a way, like, but it didn't really like
Do you think if you were in that situation yourself, if you were given a particular role, how do you think that would impact sort of how you show up? Would you feel more comfortable to be silly, to play this role, to do those sort of things? Do you think? Okay. Mhm. That you're like, you made me thorn, but I really want to be great. Okay, so you're not convinced yet about whether or not it achieves this goal of allowing you to play this other role so that you can have, your affective filter lowered and just show up without it. You're withholding judgment. You're not. Okay, fair. Other sort of reactions to what you saw, things you liked, things that you were like, no, or just questions maybe you have. Maybe I'm curious what you thought.
It was the way the interaction was not, I don't feel like they might be learning in some ways, but like it seems like they're just really having fun with the language, kind of like that, when they're like doing those activities.
I think that's a great point. I mean, you'll notice he did that whole, sort of section of pronunciation of S endings, and he was trying to teach them the rule that if it's an unvoiced, then you're gonna have that follows, but if it's voiced, then you're gonna have the voice that follows. But he wasn't trying to present a chart. He wasn't trying to explicitly say voice and unvoiced consonant, and you match this phoneme to this phoneme. He was trying to do it as if it was just this game involving these mosquitoes, right? So in a sense, having them subconsciously sort of integrate or acquire the rule without realizing that's what's happening, right? And he, like his little voiceover, he was saying, like, it seems that in Dutch, they don't have this volume. They don't have so I'm trying to get at helping them to learn to make this sound and know when to do it without having this very conscious pronunciation lesson where they learn a rule and then they're trying to apply it explicitly. It's just
No, this is speculation, but what if that's what they're doing? Because all of them seem to be dressed in a very professional manner for dressing there. So speculation, let's say that they are like people who have this tedious job. It's like everyday, mundane, boring job. And this kind of stimulus to the class, it's actually helping them more than the usual boring everyday stuff.
And I think that that's sort of the idea that, yeah, these are all these sort of professionals who, for whatever reason, came to Canada for a month, maybe for some other reason, but they also, or maybe just explicitly to do this program. And I think the idea is getting them sort of outside of their usual modes of existing in the world and entering into this very playful, relaxed, enjoyable kind of space where, and I mean, did this seem like beginners in English to you? No, they seemed actually high intermediate to my mind. The kinds of vocabulary he was using just to introduce the characters in the prelude was very high level vocabulary. There's no way that this particular group included a lot of, beginner level students. And actually, to my mind, that's what this method might be most useful for students who have already got a pretty good handle on being able to use the language, but who kind of hit a plateau, and for whom maybe some of those affective things are creating the barrier that's sort of stopping them from, this group of folks, they might have been able to pass a grammar test pretty well, to fill out worksheets and to list the vocabulary items, but they might not be able to have an enjoyable conversation in which they feel just comfortable to say what they want to say and to fully understand what's being said to them. And so for a group like this, having this kind of environment that actually just allows them to sort of get into a very playful space with English, that's what it seemed to me maybe especially useful for. Maybe this is the kind of learning environment that helps a student get over this sort of intermediate slump or plateau and enter into a space where they can use the language more creatively or communicatively. Maybe. Yeah, go ahead.
So when I was doing my last journal, my goal was to try to find methods that spoke to my linguistic side and my spatial side.
Yeah.
And I had gone out and tried to speak Polish in my neighborhood, and it was embarrassing. So I had some inhibitions now, and so I took it upon myself to try to find ways to speak, and then also dropped that filter that I now had. And then I was like, I also need spatial stuff too. What can I do? And I recruited my middle son, and I made him a script, and he doesn't speak Polish, but he's a really great mimic. LARPing, he's great at. And I was just like, you don't have to speak Polish, just say these words to me so I can then talk to you. And he made me laugh so hard because he did silly voices and he was acting like he couldn't hear me. And basically, the scenario is there's this lady on the block. She's Polish. She's a really cute dog, and I want to talk to her about her dog. So he was saying he was walking away from me, and I was trying to talk to him, and it was just really funny. And we did this all week, and we did it in chunks. And then by the end of the week, he remembered the And we were both like, we would never do this in front of other people. So it was like our thing. So I can kind of see where this is coming from. But you would have to like buy into it. You have to know what you're getting into. But the playfulness, I mean, I don't think I could learn how to fluently speak the language from it, but I did come in with vocabulary. I came in with phrases, and now I can play.
And I think that that's the basic idea there, that if we can create a learning environment in which everyone feels just safe and able to be playful, that helps us to sort of interact with the language on that other level, that subconscious level, than trying really hard in a focused way to be learning, which may suggest to us all these other negative experiences and our own fears and whatever. That is all the time that we have. So, like I said before, all of those other things that you have to do this week are in the task list on E2L. If you have any questions, concerns, or issues. Otherwise, I'll see you next.
Is there videos to see the science?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna get it ready for you, Keegan. There's a short video lecture, so watch that first, but even as you're watching that, it's like 10 minutes.
Okay.
Even as you're watching that, you might be saying to yourself, like, I don't get it. It's one of these methods that really makes more sense than when you see it. So there's 2 video and that are demo videos.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, it's very hard to explain.
Where to get your phone? I don't like it. Oh, I get it. Tell me,
Okay. Yeah.